weekend. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Okay, we are very, very pleased to have with us today Greg Fergus, who is the Member of Parliament, the Honourable Greg Fergus, excuse me, the Member of Parliament for Hull-Aylmer, Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister of Canada and to the President of the Treasury Board. We don't have enough time to list all of the committees, executive committees, and association Mr. Fergus belongs to. Suffice to say that he is a public servant in the true sense of the word. It's my pleasure to have you with me today, Mr. Fergus.
Please call me Greg. Thank you very much, Dave. That's very
You're
generous
welcome.
words that you just gave.
And meant every one of them. So we're going to start off with some background questions, simply for context in the meat of the matter, as I like to say it below. So I'd like to start off by asking you where your parents were born.
Great. My parents were born in the Caribbean. My mom was born on an island that everybody knows, Jamaica. But my father was born on a small little volcanic island called Montserrat. It's a British protectorate. And when I say small, very small, at the time that he was born, there were about 12,000 people. Then after the volcano erupted in 1997, there's only about 5,000 people left.
Mm-hmm. And where were you born?
I was born in Montreal. Born and raised in Montreal, although I was born at Queen Mary Hospital. Sorry, I'm going to say Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Mm-hmm. Or there near Vendôme.
The one on northbound?
Near Vendôme, around that area.
Yeah, that's the one. Queen Elizabeth.
That's right. Queen Elizabeth. Thank you.
Yeah.
And but of course, my parents lived in Dollard, so that's where I grew up.
And where did you receive your education? Elementary, secondary, and any post-secondary?
Well, now we're going to get into a long list of institutions. So I was, my primary, I started off from kindergarten to grade 3 at West Park School in Dollard. And then my parents switched me into French immersion. So I went to Sunnydale Park School, also in Dollard, for grade 4 through 6. Then I went to Lindsay Place High School, which just closed down a couple of years ago, for grades 7 and 8. And that was around the time that there was the big public sector strike. My dad was a teacher, and he knew that with him and his colleagues losing about 20% of their pay, that they wouldn't be very enthusiastic teachers, at least in the very short term. So they switched me to a private school. So they sent me to Selwyn House School in Westmount. So that's where I finished off my high school education. For Cégep, I went to Marianopolis College when it used to be located on Côte des Neiges. And for university, I applied and got accepted into the Parliamentary Page program here in Ottawa. So I came here to school and had every intention of returning back home, but never did. I met my my girlfriend and now wife of 31 and a half years, who's also a Montrealer. Met her while she was doing a work term here, and you know, at that time there were only jobs to be had in Ottawa. Montreal was in Quebec was in a dire strait back in the late 80s. So stayed here, worked in politics, got married back in Montreal, but moved across the way to Hull, and just always been in Hull and Aylmer ever since.
Okay, and you've already alluded to this, but for the record, I'm going to ask it again. What is your current occupation and previous occupations?
So my current occupation is since 2015, October 2015. I've been Member of Parliament for Hull-Aylmer, and then you had mentioned a number of my parliamentary duties that I do have. But before then, I had worked for the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada. I was their Director of Public Affairs from 2010 to 2014. I think that's correct. It's a little fuzzy because I left the job to pursue the nomination to to the Liberal nomination for Hull Elmer. So I think that was in early 2014 is when I left the employ of AUCC. But before then, I had actually been quite involved with the Liberal Party of Canada. So I was their national director, that's like their CEO of the party. Before that, I worked a little bit in the private sector with Canada's pharmaceutical research-based companies as their director of ethics. And before then, I'd worked for a number of ministers, or I guess really two ministers, Pierre Pettigrew and Jim Peterson. I'd also had to return to school in that time to do a second undergraduate degree and to start my master's in international relations. And my first real job was in politics, working in a constituency office for John Manley. But my first job outside of politics was with in cooperative housing, where my wife and I had co-managed, we job shared a housing co-op in Ottawa.
Now, you've alluded to it, but just to be clear, where do you live now?
Live in Elmer, Gatineau, Quebec, but in the Elmer sector of Gatineau. We're part of the fusion forcée of, and so, but the folks from Elmer always call it Elmer, and the folks from Hull always call it Hull. Those are the two cities I've lived in outside of Montreal and Quebec.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that, Greg. Now, we're going to get into what I like to call the meat of the matter, and the following questions reflect your experience living in Quebec today. So I'll start off with, what is the best thing in your experience at this moment living in Quebec?
Well, I think the best thing is the exposure to two languages, English and in French. It's really important. It gives you as you know, and I'm certain as anybody who listens to us knows, then you really think about it, language is a way of being. And being able to negotiate the world through two languages gives you, I think, a fuller picture of, you get to fill in more, you have more dynamic colors to fill in the world with. And I don't speak well any other languages. Just a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of German, but nothing to write home about. And my kids speak many languages, and I think they must experience the world in a fuller way, because there are just some things you can say in one language which just doesn't compute in another. And I think that gives you a wider range of ways of understanding the world. So I think that's the best thing about living in Quebec or being an Anglophone in Quebec, is the exposure to both languages.
Okay. Now, the next question, I asked myself the next question and I had trouble with it. And everyone I ask, they answer, I do get a straightforward answer, but they do have trouble, and they've told me they have trouble. And I encourage you to answer it as is, but elaborate in any way you see fit on your answer. So, having said that, describe your relationship to Quebec in a single word.
So, for those who are listening, you had provided me with that question before we're meeting here. And like you, and I'm glad to hear, like other people, I struggled. And it was in the struggle that I finally came up with the answer. And here's why I struggled. So my answer is complex. And why I find it complex is because I deeply love my province. And growing up when I did, I'm 53 now, born in 69. My love for this province had known no bounds, because it was a place, especially as being a Black Anglophone. I always found that Quebec got me. Quebec understood me. because being a minority, a linguistic minority in Canada and in North America, the Quebec that I grew up with was one that was extremely respectful, and the strongest promoters of minority rights. And it was a very progressive place. And I totally, got it, understood it, and it was something that had survived even in the times of René Lévesque. I mean, I'm a federalist, obviously, a strong believer in Canada, but a strong believer in Quebec within Canada. And so, to me, that tradition had been pretty solid. I think the reason why it's now moved into the complex category is that I've been seeing, I think, a move away from that. I think the best of Quebec's traditions of understanding what it is to be a minority. I'm seeing a more a nationalism that's not a civic nationalism that I find troublesome. And I think it's reflected by the current government, provincial government in Quebec, that just makes me uncomfortable. Now, Quebec is not alone in this. We're seeing this movement, I think, to more us versus them around the world. We're seeing it in the United States. You're seeing it in the UK. You're seeing it in several places in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, and it leaves me very concerned. I like the idea of, I obviously believe in rule of majority rule, but with the balises, with the bulwarks that protect, constitutional bulwarks that protect minorities. And I'm finding uses, the usage of the notwithstanding clause by the provincial government in a preemptive way profoundly disturbing. And it makes me wonder, how protected are my rights?
Okay, well, that leads me to the next question, which is, where do you feel most at home in Quebec? For example, in communities based on language, culture, profession, or
Well,
geographic location?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I feel very much at home throughout the province, but I guess the place I feel most at home is in Western Quebec, where I am now, in Elmer in particular, which I think is just this wonderful community that has all the best. Now, Elmer is about probably 65, 35% francophone anglophone, but there's a real mix. It's amazing how you'll have one parent who is francophone, one who's anglophone. It's the case in our house. My wife is francophone by birth. I'm anglophone by birth. Our children are so fluently and completely bilingual that when they speak French, you assume that they're francophone. When they speak English, you assume that they're anglophone. And I love that about my community. And there's a real harmony there. And also, again, the thing that that in the best tradition of Quebec, there's been a lot of new Canadians who have been moving to the area. I don't know if you know, but the Outaouais is the second biggest region, or Gatineau in particular, the city of Gatineau is the second biggest pole of attraction for new Canadians when they come to Quebec after Montreal. About 2/3 go to Montreal, for sure. But of that 2/3, only 2/3 stay in Montreal. Whereas when new immigrants come to Western Quebec, into Gatineau, about 98% of them stay. And I think it's largely because they get to live in French. They're highly educated. They get to go and work. They can get a good job. and all they have to do is just go across the river into Ottawa, and they could be exposed to English, and their children could be exposed to English. So it's sort of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I'm at the risk of the powers that be seeing me as being non-neutral. I love that part of the world as well.
Yeah, on top of its natural beauty,
about
and
half an hour north of Ottawa, and you're in the bush. I mean, what could you
half
have?
hour, 15 minutes, you're into the Gatineau Park. It's something else, you know.
It really is a unique spot,
Yeah.
and I have a special place in my heart for that. The next question, this is another one. It's a two-part question, and people have said to me, well, Dave, what do you mean in the second part of the question by official definition? And I'll try to describe to you what I mean, or how the question is framed. Official can mean anything you perceive it to mean. That could be the Canadian definition of Quebec, the provincial definition of Quebec government, that is, what you see in the media, what academics try to frame it as. It's an ongoing contentious debate about who and what is officially Quebec. So having said all of that, I'll ask you the two-part question. I'll let you answer in any way you see fit. How would you define a Quebecer or Quebecois, or Quebecois for that matter? And do you think the official definition in Quebec includes you?
So I think this was easy for me. A Quebecer is anyone who is a resident of Quebec. It's very simple. You hang your shingle here, you're a Quebecer. You've been here for 20 generations, like on my wife's side, you're a Quebecer. But to me, it's the fact that you're here now. That's the only definition that I think that holds water. The official definition of who is a Quebecer, I guess currently, I think mostly it has been the way that I had just defined it. The official definition now, I think is sort of slipping, and you have it reflected, I think, a little bit of a bias in some media sources, where a real Quebecer is only one who meets the linguistic test and has some roots here. Perhaps it's because I'm a first generation Quebecer. This is all I know. I didn't grow up in Jamaica. I didn't grow up in Montserrat. When I first came to Ottawa, it was really sort of funny, or to this National Capital Region. People would ask me, where you're from, and of course I would answer Montreal, and then they'd say, no, where are you really from? And I figured it always tripped me up, this question, because I innocently said, oh well, they must know Montreal. So then I said, yeah, well, I'm from Dollard. And then the third question came, where are you really from? But you have to understand, for me, to say my parents come from the West Indies is great, but it has no meaning for me. I didn't grow up there, right? I don't have the cultural references. I am a pure tourist when I go there, right? And because this is my home, and this is a place I love.
Which brings me to the next question, which you've sort of alluded to in this answer, but I'll ask it for the record. Has your sense of identity as a Quebecer changed over the years? And if so, in what ways?
Well, no, I guess that's my problem, perhaps, but I still think that I'm right. My definition hasn't changed. I'm a Quebecer who, as far as I'm concerned, I'm pure Quebecer. And I love it, and I love it because I can negotiate in my world in two languages. So I feel that I'm just as Quebecer as anyone else. It's about 20 years ago, it was 2002, was my first time going to the Côte-Nord, Quebec. And it was a family trip. It was sort of a nowhere trip with the kids. We started out we happened to be in southern Ontario, and we started out at Niagara Falls, and we saw Lake Ontario, and I said, oh, well, let's go camping. And we just kept on following, the Great Lakes through the St. Lawrence River and then the estuary. And by mistake, rather than going to Chicoutimi, that as our intention was, we took the wrong turn and we kept on going up the 138, heading towards Sept-Îles. And I remember, just looking at this place and putting my feet in the estuary's water and speaking to people and trying out the local liqueur. And I was like, this is my home. This is Quebec, and this belongs to me. And then I realized, well, some people might think that that's not the case, that I'd have to have been here for a couple of generations. But then I came to realize that argument just doesn't hold water. Literally, anyone who, like I said, sets up shingles here, a shingle here, has a claim to this place. Because if we think otherwise, then the people who truly have a claim to this land, of course, are our Indigenous brothers and sisters, because we're all immigrants here. We're all, if anyone's from European or of African or of Asian stock, we're all immigrants. It's the Indigenous peoples who were here, and I mean for thousands of years before us. So if you want to be consistent, either everyone has a claim, or the people who have a real claim, I think a lot of folks would feel uncomfortable with.
Okay, that leads us into the next question, which is, what are some of the most difficult things about living in Quebec today?
Well, I think it's just this rise of an appeal to a national character, which I think, or a trait, which I think is problematic. Of some type of some trait based on longevity of one's roots. I think that's problematic. I don't think it's majority here, but it is a very significant plurality, and it's troublesome. I'm assuming this will pass. That over time, as we look what happens in other jurisdictions around the world, we'll sort of back away from that edge, and we'll truly see each other as all as brothers and sisters.
Okay. The next question, I apologize. I should have sent you an updated version, because
Doesn't matter. That's good.
That I should have added a word. Instead of saying Quebec's Francophone majority, I meant to say members of Quebec's Francophone majority, because not the whole majority feels this way. So I'll rephrase the question in that way. In recent years, members of Quebec's Francophone majority have identified a number of linguistic and cultural threats. Which of these concerns do you share and support, and which of these concerns make you feel excluded or targeted?
Well, I certainly do accept, and I do believe that the use of the French language is on the decline, and I think the numbers bear that out. So I think that's an important recognition, and one that does concern me. I don't want us to. I really do believe in the power of language. As I mentioned before, it's a way of being. So I'm very supportive of measures that could encourage the vibrancy and the continuation of that. I just think that the actions which government which the current government is taking is not the right one. But this is my concern, period. We don't read enough. We don't write enough. We've now in social media has all what's popular on social media. It's more and more video based as opposed to text based. Now maybe I'm an anachronism, but to me, reading and the invention of writing was, it's what makes us human. It's such a powerful, impactful way of communicating it, and I think we should support any measure that can help attract us to make sure that we learn to write well, and obviously read at a very high level that introduces nuance. It makes you have those debates as to what's the difference between one word and its synonym. I think that's the magic of humanity, but I feel people don't write as much. But you're seeing that around the world, and not just in just in French. But to me, that I am worried about the state of the French language in Quebec. But then again, I think rather than lowering the bar through different reforms that we've had in the high school, and my kids were part of, they were sort of the experiment on the changes to the outcomes, because the writing tests, the results of them were decreasing. But what we did is that we lowered the standards. I'm not certain if that's what we should have done. I think we should be very supportive of ways to encourage the publishing industry, very strongly in favor of providing linguistic formation, not just for new Canadians, but for new Quebecers, people who move from one province into Quebec. There should be, more coursework to encourage people who don't speak French or don't write French at a high level, to give them all the opportunities to access those tools, so that they can, I think, become better citizens when you're able to master reading and writing. So I think you become tougher citizens to do so. You're not going to be easily dissuaded by somebody trying to sell you snake oil. So I think literacy is so key. So I would love to see a lot more programming availability to anyone who seeks it, to up their skills. Maybe you don't realize it when you're 16 and you're going through high school or cégep, but you'll certainly realize it as you get older.
Well, that leads into the next question, which again, in some of your other responses, you alluded to the answer to this one, but I'll ask it for the record anyway. What is the biggest problem facing Quebec, and how, in your mind, do you feel it could be resolved?
It's a really good question. That's a very good question. Maybe we need to be more confident in ourselves, and that we can fix the problems in front of us, that we can really confidently share our culture with the world. We have all the tools to do it. We have an extraordinary history, and a proud one. I think we can go into the future with confidence, but that doesn't mean that we're no Pollyanna-ish or pie-eyed, unrealistic view. We should be aware of the challenges that we have, but then we need to put in the resources and focus on it. When I travel to countries like Belgium or in the Netherlands, I mean, they speak their language. I go to bookstores and they have a serious publishing industry. Why? Because the government has made the investment to subsidize that industry, to making sure that there are always new works which are being created and being shared. And that's how I think you strengthen one's attachment to the language. But it does come through literacy. It does come through all forms that can push that. I think we're so attracted by the American dream, but we forget that it's not all about money. It's not all about comfort. To me, it's about culture. It's about how we think and how we share. So I think there are ways that we can do that, and if we do that with confidence, I don't think we have to we don't have to deny other groups' rights. We don't have to deny Anglophones' rights to study in English or to access services in the language of their choice. So I think that's our biggest challenge, is to stop seeing this as a zero-sum game, to adopt a stance of confidence, and then to back it up with the tools and the investments which will allow it to continue to grow and prosper.
Okay, the next question, you've probably looked at this and you're a little curious about it. I will tell you a bit of background and why I'm asking it in this fashion. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to see the documentary produced by a great friend of mine and a confrere, Guy Rogers, called What We Choose to Remember.
No, I haven't seen it.
You haven't? Well, I'm going to send you a link after. It is one of the
I like the title.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of the most eye-opening open discussions and examination of how Quebec got to where it is today that I've ever seen. It's very cleverly done. It's the subtitle is What We Choose to Remember, Quebec Seen Through Waves of Immigration. So I will send you the link to that, which I don't know how you're set up at home with internet on your TV or whatever, but the link will open and you're free to watch it either on your computer or on your television. It's about an hour, and it's one of the best hours I've spent, and has really opened my eyes in lots of ways that I weren't open before. It's just got picked up by the NFB, and he's openly promoting it throughout the province through community groups and networks. Very well done, and very educational. And
I look forward to this
for this project as well. I might add. So the reason I mention all of this is he very cleverly used as a tool, a visual tool, a show of fingers. And I openly, and with his permission, and doing the same thing with this question. So having said all of that, I'm going to ask the question on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being weakest, 10 being strongest, indicate by a show of fingers, how strongly do you feel that the joys of living in Quebec today outweigh the challenges?
Oh, well, 9, like I said, I love my province, and even if I raise some issues and some concerns about the current tendencies, I'm quite confident that we're gonna, we'll back away from that edge, and that we'll just assume our regular stance of understanding the other. I think that's in the best traditions of the province, and then maybe maybe I am being a little Pollyanna-ish, but that filmmaker's title, "How We Choose to Remember," is consistent with what I've often told people. I always say that we have this idea, this intellectual idea that history is, frozen in amber, and we describe it in very, objective ways, when nothing could be further from the truth.
Mhm.
What we choose to pull from history is really a reflection of our values today. So, when we didn't value women, we never looked at the role of women in history. We only looked at men. Then we've gone through we've now come to a larger understanding that there's more to men to society. So we look back and lo and behold, look, there are women who are talked about, who are reflected in works, who we can draw upon and analyze and understand. When we think of from my perspective as being a Black Quebec or Black Canadian, we think that Blacks have only shown up somehow in the mid to late 20th century in Quebec, when in fact Matthew DaCosta, a Black man, accompanied Samuel de Champlain, and was his river pilot and interpreter with the Indigenous languages, which means, although we have him stepping foot, or the first recorded time of him stepping foot in 1604, he obviously had to be here beforehand to
Mhm.
be able to speak the Indigenous languages, to understand how the St. Lawrence, where are the shoals and where are the deeper parts of the St. Lawrence. So, so in that regard, Blacks have been here, for well over 400 years. But only if you value Black people today will you try to seek their contributions in the past. Only if you value whatever it is today will you try to seek out their contributions in the past, and that becomes your history. So if we, I'm convinced that the best parts of Quebec are the ones that we've had by valuing and understanding our role and our place as a minority community on this continent. And that then imposes, I believe, a number of stances that we would have towards others who are minorities today.
Well, we're coming to a close, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to express anything else you'd like to say about your sense of identity and belonging in Quebec.
So Quebec is unlike any other province. For a little while, when I was studying university, when I came to Ottawa, it was so clear to me how different the province was when I came to Ontario. And I'm just, being in Ottawa is just a couple of, it's right next to Quebec. It butts up against Quebec on the Outaouais River. But it was a profound difference. And I realized how much I can't live outside of Quebec. It's my home, it's my place, it's like I said, it's a way of being. And very shortly after graduating, moved right back over to the to Quebec to found and raise our family. It's a beautiful. The more I travel, the more I come back and say, "What a wonderful place." So I am deeply attached to my home, and I feel I have as equal claim to it as anyone else, and so I should. And if I can have that, then it's clear to me that I should extend that generosity to people who also just have moved here, have chosen to come here. So I'm, you know, I think we have in a remarkable place, and hopefully we will revert to form in the coming years.
Greg, that's a great summation, and I want to thank you very, very much for your insight. It's been everybody's story is valid. Everybody's story is unique, and everybody's story, in my estimation, but for what that's worth, has been fascinating for me. Yours is no exclusion, and I thank you so much for participating in this. I'm going to stop the video now, but I just want to have a brief chat with you afterwards.
Sure.